Let's focus on economics now, and I'm joined from Queensland by the contributing economics editor of The Australian, Judith Sloan. Great to talk to you again, Judith. Tell us about the economic statement looming on Thursday. Is this going to be effectively a mini budget?
Yes, Chris, I think it is. So we would have had the budget in that first couple of weeks of May. That clearly was cancelled for a variety of reasons. And what a pity we missed the lockup. But so this,
I know how much you love a budget lockup.
Love the lockup. So this, I think, is going to be important. There will be, I think, a similar set of figures that the budget presents in terms of the forecasts of the key economic parameters. But there will also be some very important announcements in relation to the continuation of JobKeeper and JobSeeker.
Let me come back to those programs in just a moment, but you mentioned some of the outcomes here. What would you be suggesting we might have been looking at as a deficit for the financial year just ended, and where might we be heading in the current financial year?
Well, it's incredibly ugly, probably between 150 and 200 billion in terms of the deficit. It's possible because I think initially when we had the first round of the coronavirus, and we appeared to actually get that under control quite quickly, and I think at that point things were opening up and actually the economic outlook looked pretty good, particularly compared with a number of other countries. But this second wave, I don't know whether we're allowed to call it a second wave, but it kind of looks as though it's waving at me, in Victoria, and which may creep over to New South Wales. And bear in mind that, Victoria is 20% of the economy, New South Wales, more than like 25%. So it's fine for the smaller states. And I kind of agree with your point that you can understand why they've closed the borders, and their economies, internal economies, are probably doing okay. But as far as Australia is concerned, this is very damaging. And so we're going to look at negative GDP growth. We're probably going to look at negative real wage growth. And the unemployment figure is really badly measured at the moment, partly because those on JobKeeper are not called unemployed. But, Josh Frydenberg, the Treasurer, was prepared to admit that probably the real unemployment rate is somewhere around the 13% mark. So it's very ugly by recent standards.
Well, we talked about record deficits back in the Kevin Rudd, Wayne Swan years. Those records are going to be blown out of the water last year and this year. We've also talked, especially we've heard from coalition governments, about the need that there's no such thing as a free lunch. You've got to have a government that sort of pays its way, get rid of all that heavy government debt. That seems to be thrown out the window, and we've got people arguing now that none of this matters. Your own colleague, our own colleague at The Australian, Alan Kohler, who commentates on the ABC as well, is talking about this modern monetary theory that as long as governments keep printing money effectively, we're all going to be okay. Does that stack up?
Well, not at all, Chris, in part because it assumes you've got a closed economy and you never have to source any finance from overseas. And, if this were such a good idea, you'd see places like Venezuela and Cuba booming. The quality of the spend continues to matter a great deal, and the incentives for businesses to invest and to thrive are central features of what we should be thinking about going forward. Having said that, this is not a normal recession. This is a recession that has been essentially induced by the government's response to the virus. And so I think the way we look at it is different from what for example, how we looked at the GFC. If someone had said to me, last year that the government was going to introduce a wage replacement program and it's going to cost $70 billion, which is now the minimum because they'll keep it going, I would have told them they were nuts. But it's a different world. But the issue of the quality of the spend and the incentives for businesses, including allowing, I think, zombie businesses to go, are really important features of government policy.
Yeah, so tell us about that. We're going to hear a bit more about it. There's some information has been announced, but the government's looking at extending loan guarantees to small businesses and also revising the JobKeeper payments so that they are a little less generous, if you like, so that people aren't better off under them. Do you hold out much hope? Do you think this, given there's been time to work on this and look at how things are unfolding, is this going to be doable? And how much do they have to be of a mind to the different economies in different states? Because obviously Victoria, for at least the foreseeable future, the next 4 to 6 weeks is going to be locked down, whereas in Queensland, people are trading happily.
Yes, and I think it'll be interesting because the trouble is with having a nuanced program and a more specific program, say, for sectors and perhaps, I mean, I always thought they should have had a two-part payment, so one for full-time workers and the other for part-time and casual workers. I think that would not have been that hard. And as you say, some people have ended up earning more on JobKeeper than they were earning previously. So that is really a perverse outcome. I think there might be some tightening in terms, I think some of the professional services firms were able to, delay invoices and the like and therefore game the system. I'd also like that clamped down on. But again, speed, simplicity is sort of a trade-off for getting some of those details right. But and there's that issue I just mentioned that, in some ways, if firms are going to be unviable, I'm not sure either the taxpayer, the owner or the workers are particularly well served by allowing the firms to just drag on into the next year, for example.
It's a hell of a difficult thing to get right. I was talking to a small business owner last week who can't get casual labour because people are too happy on JobKeeper. That's the sort of perverse outcome you can get. Thanks for sharing your thoughts with us, Judith. Look forward to catching up again.
Pleasure, Chris.